What's up YouTube and welcome to a new video. The Corvette C8 market is one of the hottest car markets in the US as prices have been increasing consistently since its introduction. But that ended now. Prices decreased by 4% during the last 5 months. However, this isn't unexpected as I already showed you in my previous C8 Corvette video that the C8 market displayed its first cracks. We saw price stabilizations and small price decreases. However, these price drops were not yet statistically confirmed, which means that they could be the result of chance. But they formed an important part of my argumentation as to why I thought that prices would start to come down. Now before we have a look at today's market and the price decrease, I would like to point out that I have no deep-seated hatred against US cars and that there are also no hidden motives behind any of my YouTube videos. Some of these accusations were made under the previous C8 video, but this is absolutely nonsense. I just want to provide you with a data-driven view of the market. And speaking about data, let's have a quick look at today's market before we look at the price developments over time. Over here we have the US Corvette C8 market with the model year on the horizontal axis and the price on the vertical axis. Each blue dot represents a car for sale and the black axis shows the median price point for each model year. We can see that there are 2,112 cars for sale and that these have a median price of $103,000. However, prices are still extremely high and also vary a lot. The most expensive car is priced over $180,000 and there's a significant number of cars priced over $120,000. Hence, prices sit still comfortably above MSRP, as it's no problem to find a car with a 20k premium or even more. Now if we split the market between the coupes and the convertibles, we can see that convertibles are $12,000 more expensive than the coupes, so slightly more than the premium that Corvette is asking. I also had a look at some other market splits like the one for the trim levels, but none of these splits revealed any interesting insights. So let's have a look at the price development over time and see how today's market compares to the historical ones. As I already mentioned in the beginning of the video, prices decreased for the first time ever. Yet, as we're about to find out, this only goes for a specific market segment. Let's have a look at the data. Over here we have the median price development between June 2020 and January 2022. Going from left to right, prices increased with 3.6, 4.3 and 5% to end up at the market top in August of last year. Demand clearly outpaced supply. There was a real hype about the C8 Corvette and Chevrolet had problems meeting this demand. Now all of this didn't disappear overnight, but you can see that there was a fundamental shift in the market during the last 5 months. Prices namely decreased with 4% and this drop is statistically confirmed, and this means that it's unlikely to be the result of chance. However, as we saw in the previous video, where we identified that the market showed some cracks, this development doesn't go for the full market. It's the used C8 market that drove prices down. Let me show you. Over here we have now in orange the price development for the used cars and in blue the one for the new cars. Now before we look at those price developments, you can see that the used cars are priced above the new ones. And this highlights that the C8 market is still a crazy place. That's undebatable. However, we can see now that used car prices for the first time show a statistically confirmed price decrease. And note that the price drop in the beginning of the period is not valid. The June 2020 market is not representative. So we'll focus on the most recent price change. Prices namely came down by 4.2% or $4,600. And this is of course not a mind-blowing number, but I think it's an important turning point for the C8 market. Moreover, it goes for the full used market, so it's a real market shift we are looking at here. We can namely see the same price decrease when we look at the drop from a model year perspective and when we look at it from a mileage perspective. So this means that used 2020 and 2020 cars decreased in price and also that the price decrease goes for cars with different mileages. Let's have a look at the mileage perspective. Over here we can see the median price, median model year and the supply development for cars with different mileages. The orange line shows, for example, the development for cars between 300 and 1,245 miles. Now if we look at the price graph, we can see first of all that this drop in the summer of 2020 is not valid, as there were only a few cars for sale back then. We already touched upon this. Yet, in the period that followed, values increased for all mileages, but we can see that this trend lost a bit of momentum during last summer. Only cars between 300 and 1,200 miles saw an increase that was more or less the same as the increase in the previous period. It turns out that the developments in the other mileage buckets was indeed a precursor to the first price drops. In the most recent period, we can see that the full market shifted down, as all of the mileage buckets display a price decrease. So the event is definitely significant, but all of this is different for the new cars. If we go back to the previous graph, then we can see that these are still trending upwards. Chevrolet increased prices and the markup on new cars has been increasing. Alright, so we just established that used prices came down by 4%. But why did they come down right now? Well, there seem to be two simple reasons for this. Supply is way up and demand seems to be cooling down. But before we have a look at those, if you like this video, please support the channel by clicking on the like button down below. Thank you. You can, by the way, also follow me on Instagram. It's @4wheeltrader. I don't post so many photos as I tend to post car market updates in my stories. But let's have a look at supply and demand with the following market characteristics graph. Over here we have from left to right the supply development, the median mileage development and the median model year development. If we start at the left with the supply, then we can see first of all that supply for the used car shot up since April 2021. It went from 444 to 865 to 1523 cars. And all of this mainly results from 2021 cars which are put up for sale again. The data of course doesn't show what the reason is for this supply increase, but I wouldn't be surprised to find out that these are people who want to benefit from the high prices. They bought the car in 2020 or 2021, drove it for a bit and now want to flip it for a profit. Another reason might be that people are preparing for the introduction of the new Z06. But again, all of this is just speculation. Nevertheless, whatever the reason is for the increase, it for sure helps to explain the decrease in prices. There might be too many people trying to sell their C8 for too high prices, and potential buyers seem to be a bit fed up with it. The increase in supply is namely also reflected in the increase of the average days it takes to sell a used Corvette C8. With an average of 26 days, a used C8 ranked consistently in the top 20 fastest selling used cars in the US. Yet, since June 2021 it dropped out of the top 20. And hereby it provides another strong signal that the used C8 market might be cooling off, as supply seems to have increased more than demand. Now on top of all of this comes a more technical reason that helps to explain the price decrease. The increase in mileage for the used cars which are put up for sale. We can see an almost linear increase since November 2020, and typically the higher the mileage, the lower the price. However, the increases are not exceptionally large, so I see this more as a contributing factor and not as a driving force. And again, all of this doesn't really apply to new cars. Supply reached 300 cars in November 2020 and has been hovering slightly above that, currently peaking at 440 cars. So it's clear that supply levels didn't improve significantly in that market. Also, demand in relationship to this supply level is still very strong. According to iSeeCars, it only took around 10 days to sell a new C8 in 2021, and hereby it was the fastest or among the fastest selling new cars in the US. However, in November they reported a slowdown, as the average time to sell increased to 16 days. This is still incredibly fast, and it makes the C8 still the 8th fastest selling car in the US, but it might be an early signal that the worst in the market is over. We can see a very small uptrend over here in the most recent period, but this could just be pure chance, so we can't rely on this. And with that, let's do a little recap and talk about future prices. The Corvette C8 market is still a crazy market, as prices are extortionate. However, based on the last 5 months we can see that things start to cool down, especially in the used car market. There's still a large disequilibrium between demand and supply, but the gap became a bit smaller. We namely saw that supply increased a lot during the last period, and also that the average days it takes to sell a used C8 increased. And all of this resulted in a price drop of 4%. We also saw that all of this is different in the new market, as supply is still a lot lower than demand, resulting in a continuation of the upward price trend. Of course, also the price increase from Chevrolet doesn't help here. Yet, there's a small indication that also the new market might be slowing down, as the average time it takes to sell a new C8 has been increasing. But this could also be pure chance. So what does all of this then mean for future prices? Looking only at the used C8 market, I think it's fair to expect a continuation of the price decrease. Supply is likely to increase. More new cars are entering the market, and this usually means that supply in the used market goes up. On top of that also comes the Z06 introduction, and that might lead to an increase in trade-ins. With also an increase in the average days it takes to sell a C8, people who are trying to sell their car will continue to lower their price till there is sufficient demand, and the car will sell within a reasonable time frame. So to sum it up, I expect that the gap between demand and supply continues to decrease, resulting in lower prices. So will there be a market crash? I don't think so. I think it will be more a gradual adjustment as things are moving relatively slowly on the demand and on the supply side. On top of all of this comes, by the way, that the C8 is a car. And this in most cases means that it's a depreciating asset. People are using their C8s and this means that mileages are increasing, something which usually means price decreases. If we switch over then to the new market, then I find it more difficult to express a clear forecast. Supply is not really moving a lot and prices are still creeping up. Therefore, I'm still expecting a slight price increase in that market or a flattening of the price trend. It's just very hard to say at this point. Chevrolet needs to produce enough cars at a quick enough rate to stabilize prices. Alternatively, demand for new C8s needs to come down, something which might be aided by the introduction of the Z06. Overarching to all of these supply and demand dynamics that we just discussed are of course some macro developments, like the development of the interest rates. I discussed a few of them in my previous video, so you can click over here if you want to check them out. But what do you think that will happen? Will prices continue to decrease, or will they start to stabilize or perhaps even increase again? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this video, you can also let me know for which car you would like to see an analysis. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I will make a video about it. Don't forget then to subscribe and to click on the notification bell to get notified when your requested analysis goes live. And with that, we arrived at the end of this video. As always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you next week for a new video.